What bands do you think of when I say the word emo? Whether you're thinking of My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy and Taking Back Sunday, or Jawbreaker, Sunny Day Real Estate and American football, there's one common factor. Aside from both interpretations of emo including Jimmy Eat World, all of these bands are American. While Los Campesinos describing themselves as the UK's first and only emo band is very obviously tongue-in-cheek, aside from Funeral for a Friend and Yumi at 6 in the 2000s, there actually aren't many other emo bands from the UK who've reached this level of success. And yes, emo is an American genre at its heart, originating from the Washington DC hardcore scene and finding a home in the Midwest. However, the history of music from the 50s onwards has seen countless examples of British artists taking on American musical trends and excelling at them. So what I'm asking today is, where are all the British emo bands? Firstly though, we'll need a quick rundown on the history of emo as a genre. The birth of emo as a genre can be traced back to the release of Rites of Spring's self-titled and only album in 1985. Rites of Spring emerged in the Washington DC hardcore scene alongside the likes of Minor Threat and Bad Brains, but their personal, introspective lyrics set them apart from their contemporaries and their sound became known as emotional hardcore, later shortened to emo. Other bands from this scene such as Embrace, no, not them, and Lost Icon helped to provide the foundations for the burgeoning genre. Into the 90s, emo became more than just a subgenre of hardcore, with bands incorporating more melodic pop-punk and indie rock elements. Instead of aggressive punk-influenced sounds, bands were favouring twinkly, arpeggiated guitars, slower tempos, and more refined vocal performances. This era has become known as Midwest emo to many, following the popularity of American football, Cap'n Jazz, and Braid. However, bands from outside the Midwest, such as Mineral, Jawbreaker, and Sunny Day Real Estate, were just as significant. If you want to know the moment where the second wave ended and the third wave began, it's probably somewhere in between the release of Jimmy Eat World's Clarity in 1999 and then Bleed American in 2001. The difference? Clarity is an album beloved by the underground scene as it sums up the sound of second wave emo, whereas Bleed American, and more specifically its single The Middle, helped usher in the era of radio-friendly emo music. With the likes of Dashboard Confessional, My Chemical Romance, and Taking Back Sunday then also achieving success, major labels took notice and pushed the genre firmly into the mainstream. This popularity then saw a rise in emo and scene as fashion trends, with straightened black hair and thick eyeliner becoming associated with the genre. Away from the mainstream, a revival of emo's fundamental sounds began taking place in the late 2000s through the likes of Algernon Cadwallader and Glockamora. With a return to a less poppy and more punk-influenced sound, these emo revival bands also looked to incorporate elements of math rock and post-rock. The movement began to gain popularity, especially in some particular local scenes. Chicago produced Castavet, Into It Over It, and Dowsing, while Philadelphia had Modern Baseball, Marietta, and Hop Along. Important bands of the era also included Snowing, Camping in Alaska, and Empire Empire Our Lonely Estate, but the defining album of this revival was The Hoteliers' Home Like No Place Is There, which Spin named as the best album of fourth wave emo. The fifth wave is less clearly defined as it includes the present day, but is really just a continued evolution of the genre by the next generation of bands. The crossover point from fourth wave to post-revival can arguably be seen as Best Buds by Mom Jeans or Greatest Hits by Remo Drive. To date, the scene is as vibrant as ever, with bands like Origami Angel, Home Is Where, and Awake But Still in Bed taking emo into its next era. So what was happening in the UK during these key moments? Well, punk in the UK took a different journey in the late 70s and early 80s with the rise of post-punk. The breakaway from the frenzied early sounds of punk led to bands experimenting more with their lyrics and instrumentation. Joy Division, The Cure, and Susie and the Banshees started embracing darker, emotive elements, with the latter two particularly formative in the later gothic rock movement. Then, into the 90s, grunge made some waves in the UK in influencing indie rock, but by the middle of the decade, Britpop was king. And soon, there were waves of bands following in the footsteps of Blur, Oasis, and Pulp. The most notable exception was Radiohead, who weren't exactly an emo band, but certainly showed similar influences at times. The Bends and OK Computer featured emotionally tender lyrics along with twinkly arpeggiated riffs as well as soaring driven chords. However, Tom York's lyrics touch on much wider themes than most emo bands. Later into the 2000s, mainstream emo had certainly arrived in the UK, and bands like Funeral for a Friend and Yumi at Six immersed themselves within the post-hardcore and pop-punk subsections of mainstream emo. However, they were unable to reach the same heights as the giants from the US with their major label backing. And also, this trend arrived at the same time as the UK's indie revival. There were some emotionally driven and even emo-influenced bands within the UK indie scene, such as Block Party and We Are Scientists, themselves named after a Cap'n Jazz song. When the fourth wave arrived in the US, one of the key bands in the movement was actually from the UK. TTNG, formerly known as This Town Needs Guns, mixed math rock with emo with perhaps the most proficient intricacy of any emo revival band. Their debut album, Animals, in particular helped to define the math rock influenced twinkly guitar sound of the genre. Also, the late 2000s saw the arrival of Los Campesinos. Soon evolving beyond an indie twee sound, the band began to show wider emo and post-rock influences, and frontman Gareth Paisley's lyrics had evolved to become some of the finest across their indie and emo contemporaries. But aside from these two and a few other British bands, the emo revival was strictly a US phenomenon. The UK's indie revival was still dominating guitar music in the country. Festival placements and national radio airtime in the UK were given to alternative bands in ways that US alternative rock bands don't experience. But emo bands from local UK scenes remained on the fringes without sizable fan bases for the genre in these areas. And now, while US emo bands this century have been able to tour successfully in the UK, including the return of American football, British emo bands still exist on the periphery. That's not to say that there aren't good British emo or emo adjacent bands around currently. Basement are probably the biggest recently, and there are also Delta Sleep, Slash Fiction, Don't Worry, Other Half, Suit Sprite, Orchards, Fight Milk, and plenty more. But who's going to be the next band to become an established part of the emo scene? I spoke with some of the emo bands present in the UK currently. Firstly, I checked in with Slash Fiction.
Turns out I need the stupid serotonin after all.
They said, "So I think the emo scene is in what I would call a more exciting place than I remember it being in the time I've been involved with it. Bands like Student Slasher Film, Pale Sailor, Forum Friends, etc. are making fun and exciting emo music, and I really enjoy being part of this scene. I think the biggest obstacle for pushing to the next level is that getting label support for emo music in this country is incredibly difficult, and almost all of us are reliant on self-releasing our music." I also spoke with Ronan from Don't Worry about their influences and experiences. He said, "We never set out to be an emo band. Actually, we wouldn't describe ourselves as an emo band, certainly not straightforwardly anyway, but other people sometimes use the word emo when describing our music, and that's cool." As for the emo scene, to be honest, I'm not totally sure if there is still an active emo scene in the UK. If there is, we haven't been asked to take part. The scene that did exist from 2014 when we formed Don't Worry until around the start of the pandemic, we never really felt part of. We flirted with it, we definitely played shows with emo bands, but we always felt we were too indie for the punk crowd and too heavy for the indie crowd. We've never really felt like we belonged to a particular genre or scene, and that has its pros and cons. As for the challenges and obstacles facing any type of alternative guitar band in 2024, in a nutshell, it's always been incredibly difficult to break through and get beyond playing small shows in your local area, and especially hard to get beyond playing DIY shows around your own country. But maybe it's even harder than usual right now. Weird emotional guitar music definitely isn't in vogue with the vast majority of the cool kids right now, not even to the extent it was 5 to 10 years ago. But we've been able to do a lot of things we never thought would be possible, and we're really grateful for that. If we were asked to share advice with bands earlier on in their careers, we'd say just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. If you make a band with the main focus being to make it or whatever, you're almost definitely going to end up being very disappointed. Being in a band should be about hanging out with your friends and expressing yourself, being creative, and sharing those creations with people because it's fun. It's also a great way to process your own feelings. Don't worry
Hey, that's the name of the
band.
about whether your band is emo or not. Just do what feels natural and right. In the description, I've included a link to a full statement from Roland from Don't Worry, as he shared loads more insight about the band's influences and their advice for new bands looking to take the same journey. And so, what are the conclusions? While there are exciting local scenes of emo and emo-adjacent bands in the UK, such as across Yorkshire as mentioned by Slash Fiction, unfortunately, it's hard for bands to expand beyond these scenes. As Don't Worry alluded to, emo bands can in fact be seen as too indie for the punk scene, which itself remains thriving throughout the UK, but also too heavy for more mainstream indie crowds. It's fantastic that there's the infrastructure in place for bands like Idols and Yard Act to reach national audiences, and that British indie remains popular and relevant through the likes of Blossoms and Sam Fender. But it's a shame that the country's best fundamentally emo bands don't often get picked up by the likes of Radio 6, Enemy or Kerrang. Even the commendable chart success of the comeback album from Los Campesinos was through their own hard work and past experience in self-promotion. A Best New Album review from Pitchfork helped internationally, but the album didn't even get a review from the likes of Enemy, The Guardian and The Independent in the UK. And so, what can we do? It's a generic answer, but keep going to local shows, get there early for the support bands, buy the t-shirts, and tell your friends. And for now, make sure to comment on this video with your favourite British emo band, past or present, especially if I haven't already mentioned them. Thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.